Welcome to this online briefing on a consultation on proposed amendments to fire safety standards in the building regulations. Primary legislation concerning building regulations here is the Building Regulations Northern Ireland Order 1979 as amended. One of the powers in that order, Article 3, allows the department to make building regulations. So using that power, the department makes building regulations, and the current building regulations are the Building Regulations Northern Ireland 2012 as amended. Since 2012, those regulations have been amended 4 times, at the end of 2012, in 2014, in 2016, and last year in 2022. So the 2012 regulations are ground zero, if you like, and they have been built upon through these 4 amendments. What we are proposing in this consultation package of changes will result in a new statutory rule entitled the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2023. Obviously, if the statutory rule isn't made by the end of 2023 and it slips into 2024, it will be entitled the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. It will be the 5th amendment to the 2012 regulations, and it will be made up of amendments to Part A, Interpretation in General, and Part E, Fire Safety of the Building Regulations. There will also be changes to the supporting guidance in Technical Booklet E, Fire Safety. Just a brief look at the makeup of the building regulations. The regulations currently consist of 103 regulations and 3 schedules. The regulations are split into different parts, covering different aspects to design. Since 2012, the regulations have been numbered 1 to 99. Regulation 1 is in Part A, Interpretation in General, and Regulation 99 is in Part V, Glazing. 4 extra regulations have been added through the amendments since 2012, making up the current 103 regulations. Our proposed 2 new regulations in Part E as part of this amendment will bring the number to 105 regulations. For information purposes, schedules are written to regulations where a lot of detail is associated with that regulation. So Schedule 1 is written to Regulation 3, Transitional Provisions. Schedule 2 is written to Regulation 4, Exemptions. And Schedule 3 is written to Regulation 9, Giving of Notices and Deposit of Plans. As you can see, Part E for Fire Safety slots in after Part D and before Part F. So the Part E Fire Safety Regulations currently consist of 6 regulations, numbered Regulations 32 to 37. Regulation 32 is the application and interpretation. Regulation 33 is means of escape. Regulation 34, internal fire spread for linings. Regulation 35, internal fire spread structure. Regulation 36, external fire spread. And Regulation 37, facilities and access for the fire and rescue service. What's proposed in this consultation is 2 new regulations to be added to Part E. A new Regulation 37A for the provision of fire safety information, and a new Regulation 37B for automatic fire suppression systems. The result, Part E will consist of 8 regulations, with the 2 new regulations slotting in after Regulation 37. Please note Regulations 37A and 37B have nothing to do with Regulation 37. They have been labelled as such purely for numbering reasons. We cannot number them 38 and 39 because those regulations already exist in the next part of the Building Regulations, Part F. There will also be amendments to Regulation 32, Application and Interpretation, associated with the new definitions for terms used in Regulations 37A and 37B. Looking at new Regulation 37A first, it is proposed to read as such on screen. Quite a lengthy regulation, so I think it is best to break it down into 37A1 and 37A2. 37A1 basically sets the type of work that will trigger the application of the regulation and the scope of buildings the regulation will apply to. So the type of work for 37A includes when a building in scope is newly erected, is extended and/or altered, and when it is created as a result of a material change of use, called a relevant change of use for the purposes of this regulation. Scope of buildings that Regulation 37A will apply to are relevant premises, as defined under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006. This basically means all buildings, bar domestic type premises. And because blocks of flats are not relevant premises under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order, and we want this regulation to apply to blocks of flats, they are a separate item in the regulation as buildings containing one or more flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. The actual requirement in Regulation 37A is set in 37A2, and it is for the person carrying out the work to provide adequate fire safety information to the person with fire safety responsibilities in a building not later than the date of completion of the work or the date of occupation of the building, whichever is earlier. The person carrying out the work is also required to notify in writing the District Council that they have done Part A. Due to the use of new terms in Regulation 37A, new definitions for fire safety information, fire safety duties, relevant change of use, and relevant premises have been inserted into Regulation 32, Application and Interpretation of Part E. Moving on to new Regulation 37B, Automatic Fire Suppression Systems. This is a little more straightforward. The wording is deliberately simplistic and prescriptive. 37B1 sets the requirement, and 37B2 lists in a prescriptive way the scope of buildings the new regulation applies to. So those types of buildings are a building containing one or more flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level, a building containing purpose-built student accommodation with a story more than 11 metres above ground level, and all residential care premises, irrespective of story height. Again, Regulation 32, Application and Interpretation, is amended to set the type of work that will trigger the application of Regulation 37B. In this instance, it will only apply to buildings in scope that are newly erected or formed by a material change of use. Also, new definitions are added to Regulation 32.3 for above ground level, purpose-built student accommodation and residential care premises. The definition for residential care premises includes residential care homes, nursing homes, children's homes, and family residence centres, with the meanings from the Health and Personal Social Services, Quality Improvement and Regulation Northern Ireland Order 2003 being used. So because we want new regulations 37A and 37B to apply when a building in scope is created as a result of a material change of use, we need to amend Regulation 8, Application to Material Change of Use in Part A of the Building Regulations. You will see in the Consultation Proposals document an amended table to Regulation 8 and amended notes to the table to Regulation 8. These should demonstrate which cases of material change of use new Regulations 37A and 37B will apply to. Just going back to the primary legislation of the Building Regulations Northern Ireland Order 1979, and under Article 5A, the Department has the power to write guidance to the Building Regulations. In terms of the Part E regulations, we write guidance in Technical Booklet E, TBE. Following the guidance in TBE is one way, but not the only way, to demonstrate compliance with Part E. For the more common situations, there is a presumption of compliance with Part E if following TBE. You can also use TBE as a benchmark of performance, so any other solution you propose must demonstrate an equal or better level of performance as that established in TBE. Currently, TBE is made up of 6 sections and 3 appendices. Section 2 gives guidance on Regulation 33, means of escape. Section 3 gives guidance on Regulation 34, internal fire spread linings. Section 4 gives guidance on Regulation 35, internal fire spread structure. Section 5 gives guidance on Regulation 36, external fire spread. And Section 6 gives guidance on Regulation 37, facilities and access for the fire and rescue service. Part of these consultation proposals, there are amendments to existing Section 1, Section 2 and Section 6 of TBE. There are 2 new Sections 7 and 8 proposed to give guidance on the 2 new regulations, 37A and 37B. There's also some amendments to Appendix C to update some of the publications referred to. All of the changes are highlighted in detail in the consultation version of TBE issued as part of the consultation package. Taking the changes in order, in Section 1 there is proposed new definitions for above ground level, fire safety duties, fire safety information, habitable room, relevant change of use and relevant premises. These replicate the definitions used in the Part E regulations. The definition of habitable room is taken from the definition used in BS 9991, so it will differ from that of the definition used in Part A of the Building Regulations. In Section 2, Means of Escape, a change is proposed in relation to fire alarm provision in new dwellings. The change would mean in all new build dwellings or dwellings created by a material change of use, the fire alarm system should have a smoke alarm in all habitable rooms, as opposed to the existing position of smoke alarm in the principal habitable room. The definition of habitable room, being taken from BS 9991, would mean all rooms bar a kitchen, utility room, bathroom, shower room, dressing room or WC would require a smoke alarm. Also proposed in TBE is some new guidance to clarify the fire alarm expected to be provided in a dwelling which is subject to an extension and/or alteration work. Basically, the provision of a full fire alarm system to new build standards will be based on whether a new habitable room or kitchen is created as part of the extension and/or alteration work. Also in section 2 for means of escape in regard to flats, there is guidance proposed to clarify what is expected in order to ensure adequate smoke control of the common escape routes in buildings containing flats. There is guidance given for natural smoke ventilation for single stair buildings with and without a story more than 11 metres above ground, and also multiple stair buildings. There is also guidance for mechanical smoke ventilation. So this clarified guidance will bring TBE into line with BS 9991 with regard to this issue. The last set of measures for change are in Section 6, Facilities and Access for the Fire and Rescue Service. These measures are aimed at improving safety for firefighters during an operational response. The first is in relation to firefighting shaft provision. Currently in TBE, buildings of Purpose Group 4, 6 and 7A are required to have a firefighting shaft if they have a story 900 metres squared or more in area at a height of 7.5 metres or more above fire and rescue access level. The proposed change is that Purpose Group 5 buildings, assembly and recreation, are also required to have a firefighting shaft if they have a story 900 metres squared or more in area at a height of 7.5 metres or more above Fire and Rescue Service access level. The second item concerns provision of fire mains. Currently, TBE requires the maximum distance from any point on a floor to a fire mains in a firefighting shaft to be 60 metres maximum. That 60 metres is measured on a route suitable for laying a fire hose. The amendment proposed is that in addition to that, the maximum distance from any point on a floor to a fire mains in a protected shaft, not necessarily a firefighting shaft, should be 45 metres. Again, a distance measured on a route suitable for laying a fire hose. As those distances are hose laying routes, if working off plans, direct distances allowable would be 2/3 of those figures. So that is 40 metres in relation to the 60 metre maximum and 30 metres in relation to the 45 metres maximum. The third item sets a new maximum height for provision of a dry fire mains. Currently, TBE requires the provision of a wet fire mains where a building has a story more than 60 metres above fire and rescue access level. The proposed change is to reduce that to 50 metres maximum for provision of a dry fire mains. Buildings with a story more than 50 metres above fire and rescue access level would require a wet fire mains. The fourth item of change in Section 6 relates to fire vehicle access. Currently, TBE requires access for pump appliances to within 45 metres of each door giving access to a dwelling. The proposed change is to make it 45 metres to all points within a dwelling. So this 45 metres again is a hose route, and this obviously does not apply to buildings that have a fire mains. Next item proposed in Section 6 of TBE is the provision of evacuation alert sounder systems in blocks of flats with a story more than 18 metres above ground level. Although rare, there may be occasion for a Fire and Rescue Service incident commander to order the partial or full evacuation of a building in the event of fire. Provision of these evacuation alert sounder systems will assist the Fire and Rescue Service in these types of high-rise residential buildings. Its felt blocks of flats lower than 18 metres can be evacuated by Fire and Rescue Service personnel simply knocking on doors. BSI have created a new standard for such systems, BS 8629, and that is cited in the guidance for these systems to adhere to. It's also proposed to require the provision of wayfinding signage in buildings containing flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. The requirement will apply to floor indicator signs and individual flat indicator signs. Again, this will assist fire and rescue service personnel in carrying out their function of search and rescue in these types of buildings. Lastly, in relation to changes to Section 6 of TBE, is a new requirement for the provision of a secure information box for buildings containing flats with a story more than 18 metres above ground level. This box may contain a copy of up-to-date floor plans, location of key firefighting equipment, a single-page building plan, and contact details for the person in charge of the building. Again, this information can be very useful to fire and rescue service attending an incident. Also in the proposed TBE for consultation is a new Section 7 to give guidance to the new Regulation 37A provision of fire safety information. The guidance clarifies that for existing buildings in scope that are subject to an extension and/or alteration work, the information to be provided should only relate to the work where it has an impact on the fire safety strategy of the building. Remember, buildings in scope are relevant premises as defined under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006, and to buildings containing flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. The guidance is broken into essential information, which would be required for all buildings in scope, and additional information for complex buildings. So for more complex buildings, the guidance asks for more detailed records to do with the fire safety strategy for the building and procedures for operating and maintaining fire protection measures in the building. A new Section 8 is proposed in TBE to give guidance on sprinklers as one way to satisfy new Regulation 37B automatic fire suppression systems. The guidance tries to address the coverage of sprinklers, whether that be in individual flats themselves or also in common areas, including common escape routes, where these areas are not fire sterile. The guidance also cites BSI standards BS 9251 as the design standard to follow for sprinkler systems in residential buildings, and BSEN 12845 for automatic sprinkler systems in non-residential buildings. There is also guidance given for water supplies and pumps to non-residential sprinkler systems designed and installed to BSEN 12845. Lastly, there is guidance to advise developers and designers to discuss project-specific details with Northern Ireland Water in relation to water supplies and pressures. In Appendix C of TBE, a number of publications referred to in association with these changes have been revised. So BSEN 14604 of 2005 is now cited for smoke alarm devices. BS 5839 Part 6 of 2019 is the Code of Practice for the Design, Installation and Maintenance of Fire Detection and Fire Alarm Systems in Dwellings. BSEN 12101 Part 2 of 2017 for the design of natural smoke and heat exhaust ventilators. BSEN 12101 Part 6 of 2022 as the specification for pressure differential systems. BS 9251 of 2021 as the Code of Practice for fire sprinkler systems for domestic and residential occupancies. BS 9999 of 2017 as the Code of Practice for fire safety in the design, management and use of buildings, and BS 8629 of 2019 as the Code of Practice for the design, installation, commissioning and maintenance of evacuation alert systems for use by fire and rescue services in buildings containing flats. So just to summarise then, this consultation proposes amendments to Part A and Part E of the building regulations. There is also guidance changes to Technical Booklet E, Fire Safety. The Part E proposed changes are two new regulations, 37A and 37B. 37A will require the provision of fire safety information at the handover stage from design and construct to occupation phase in the life cycle of a building. The scope of buildings the new regulation will apply to are relevant premises as defined under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006 and buildings containing flats with a storey more than 11 metres above ground level. New Regulation 37B will require the provision of automatic fire suppression systems in specific types of buildings when newly erected or created as a result of a material change of use. These types of buildings are limited to buildings containing flats with a storey more than 11 metres above ground level, purpose-built student accommodation with a storey more than 11 metres above ground level, and all residential care premises, irrespective of storey height. Technical Booklet E proposed changes include a higher level of automatic fire detection and fire alarm provision in all new build dwellings or dwellings created as a result of a material change of use. This will mean smoke alarm provision in all habitable rooms, as opposed to the current position of smoke alarm in the principal habitable room. For existing dwellings, there is also proposed guidance to clarify the provision of automatic fire detection and alarm when an extension and/or alteration work takes place. Also proposed is guidance to clarify the smoke ventilation requirements in the common escape routes for buildings containing flats. This new guidance replicates that in BS 9991 2015 version. The Department will keep a watching brief on BS 9991 developments and if a new version will be published in the coming months or not. If any changes occur in relation to this issue of smoke ventilation in BS 9991, we will consider those before publishing the final guidance in TBE. The measures to assist the Fire and Rescue Service include new firefighting shaft provisions, new fire mains provisions, fire vehicle access distance amendments, and provision of evacuation alert sounder systems, wayfinding signage, and secure information boxes in buildings containing flats with a storey over a certain height. A new Section 7 is proposed for fire safety information as guidance to new Regulation 37A, and a new Section 8 is proposed for sprinklers as guidance to new Regulation 37B. Lastly, there are some new publications referred to and amendments to existing standards referred to in Appendix C. Just to sum up then with some reminders regarding the consultation. The consultation will run until the 25th of September. Consultation documents, including how to respond, are available at www.finance-ni.gov.uk/consultations. We would ask that you respond using the Citizen Space platform. There is a total of 24 questions covering the matters changes we've covered in the slides. 2 of the questions are on the Part A amendments, namely to Regulation 8, a material change of use. 8 of the questions are on the amendments to Part E, i.e. new Regulations 37A and 37B. 12 questions are on the proposed changes to Technical Booklet E. 1 question is on the Regulatory Impact Assessment, and 1 question is for general comments or observations. There is a list of questions asked with answers on our website, and if you have any queries, please email them to info.bru@finance-ni.gov.uk. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you got something out of it, and we look forward to receiving your responses to the consultation. Thank you.